The North Atlantic was silent on the night of its disappearance. A thin crescent moon hung low over the water, barely illuminating the long, rolling swells that stretched into the darkness. It was early 1941, one of the most dangerous winters of the war, and a single battleship moved steadily across the cold sea, its engines beating with the heavy rhythm of a floating fortress. Lookouts remembered the wind that night, sharp, freezing, carrying the distant smell of burned fuel from earlier convoy routes. The ship's wake cut a pale line behind it, the only visible mark of its presence in an ocean consumed by war. Then, sometime after midnight, the horizon swallowed the battleship. No distress signal. No plume of smoke. No final transmission. Just silence. When dawn broke, patrol aircraft scanned the same waters and found nothing, not a fragment of wood, not an oil slick, not a drifting body in the cold Atlantic. A vessel weighing tens of thousands of tons had vanished as though it had been erased from the surface of the earth. And to understand how such a disappearance was even possible, we must step back into the world that surrounded it. When the battleship Roma sailed into the Second World War, it represented the final expression of Italy's naval ambition. Completed in mid-1942, she was the last of the Littorio-class battleships, modern, heavily armored, and designed to compete with the great capital ships of Britain, Germany, and the United States. At full load, she displaced more than 45,000 tons. Her triple-turreted 15-inch guns could fire armor-piercing shells across more than 20 miles of open sea. On paper, Roma was among the most formidable battleships of the Mediterranean. But she entered the war at a time when the Mediterranean was already unforgiving. By 1942, the Axis supply lines to North Africa were collapsing under Allied air power, and every major Italian naval movement risked being intercepted from the seas. The seas south of Sardinia and west of Naples had become hunting grounds for Allied reconnaissance aircraft. Every wake left by a battleship, every trace of smoke rising from a funnel drew attention. Yet Roma survived her early months largely intact. She escorted convoys, provided distant support for operations, and endured repeated air attacks from British forces operating out of Malta. Despite these strikes, the battleship remained untouched, her thick deck armor and compartmentalized hull absorbing near misses without serious damage. Sailors who served aboard her noted the ship's stability, the efficiency of her crew, and the sense of pride that came with operating one of Italy's most advanced warships. By the summer of 1943, however, the strategic situation changed dramatically. The Allies landed in Sicily. Axis positions crumbled faster than expected. As the front moved north, the Italian High Command found itself facing a reality it had long feared: the collapse of Italy's wartime alliance with Germany. The government of Benito Mussolini fell in late July. Marshal Pietro Badoglio took power, and by early September, secret negotiations with the Allies were nearing completion. On the evening of 8 September 1943, the Armistice of Cassabile was announced. Italy would cease fighting the Allies, an abrupt political break that plunged the Italian Navy into uncertainty. For years, Italian sailors had fought beside German sailors. Now, suddenly, they were ordered to turn their guns away from their former partner. Within hours, the entire Italian battle fleet received new orders, sailed to Allied-controlled ports, specifically La Maddalena, and then onward to Malta, to prevent the Germans from seizing the capital ships. The fleet that moved out included 3 battleships, Roma, Italia, and Vittorio Veneto, accompanied by cruisers and destroyers. It was one of the largest Italian naval movements of the war, yet it occurred under extraordinary political tension. German forces, feeling betrayed, began immediate operations to neutralize or capture the Italian fleet. What none of the Italian sailors knew that morning was that the German Luftwaffe had already prepared a new and devastating weapon, one capable of striking battleships from altitudes previously considered safe. The weapon was the Fritz X, the first operational radio-guided anti-ship glide bomb in history. Designed to pierce armor and explode deep within a ship's structure, it was a technological step beyond anything the Italians or Allies had previously faced. As the fleet left La Spezia and headed westward, German bomber crews took off from southern France. Their goal was simple and uncompromising: stop the Italian battleships from reaching Allied protection. The Italian fleet sailed in bright morning light. Officers aboard Roma noted the calmness of the sea, the slow rhythm of the battleship's engines, and the uneasy silence among the crew. Rumors of German retaliation had begun spreading through the ranks. Sailors wondered what their next orders would be, and whether they would be forced to fight against men they once considered comrades. This moment, tension at sea, a fleet in motion, and a weapon never before used, formed the backdrop to the disappearance that would soon follow. And to understand why Roma's final hours became one of the war's most puzzling naval losses, we must examine the wider operational picture surrounding her last voyage. The morning of 9 September 1943 unfolded with deceptive clarity. The Italian fleet, its battleships, cruisers and destroyers arranged in column formation, moved steadily along the northern coast of Sardinia. The sea was calm enough for the wakes of each ship to form long white trails, visible even from high altitude. The air was dry, carrying the low hum of engines and the occasional metallic echo from the battleship's superstructures. On the bridge of Roma, officers monitored charts, updated bearings, and awaited confirmation that La Madonna, their first rendezvous point, was still in Italian hands. But inland, German forces were already sweeping through Sardinia's key positions. Overnight, they had moved quickly, neutralizing coastal batteries and pushing Italian troops from strategic sites. As Roma and the fleet approached the area, intercepted radio messages revealed the truth. La Madonna had fallen. The port that was meant to shelter the Italian battle fleet was no longer secure. Admiral Carlo Bergamini, commanding the force from aboard Roma, ordered the fleet to alter course southward. The new destination was modern Annaba in Algeria, an Allied-controlled port. It was a bold but logical decision. The fleet had to avoid capture at all costs. The turn to the south, however, placed the ships on a course that would soon be exposed to German reconnaissance aircraft operating from southern France and northern Italy. By late morning, German spotter planes had located the Italian formation. Their reports were transmitted to bomber units equipped with the new Fritz X guided weapon. Until this operation, the bomb had never been used in actual combat against battleships. The Luftwaffe saw this moment as an opportunity not only to punish what they viewed as Italian betrayal, but also to demonstrate a revolutionary advancement in anti-ship warfare. Shortly after noon, Do-217 K2 bombers of Kampfgeschwader 100 began their approach. They climbed to operational altitude, around 5,000 to 6,000 meters, high enough to avoid conventional anti-aircraft fire. Italian gunners spotted the bombers as small, dark specks against the sky. Their altitude made it nearly impossible to judge whether they were attacking or merely observing. Only when the bombers drifted into position directly above the fleet did the Italian crews understand the danger. The fleet increased speed, destroyers laid down smoke screens, but the sky above them remained painfully clear. The first Fritz X bombs fell not on Roma, but on Italia, the battleship directly ahead. One of the bombs slammed into Italia's bow, blasting through the deck and detonating underwater. The explosion tore a large gash in her hull, but the battleship remained afloat. Italian sailors watched in disbelief. The bomb had fallen with unnatural precision, descending almost perfectly vertically in a way no conventional bomb could. Italian officers realized they were facing a new kind of threat, something that could track its target after release. Then attention turned toward Roma. She was the flagship, the lead command vessel, and she carried the admiral whose decisions would determine the fate of the entire fleet. German bombers shifted focus toward her, positioning themselves for a second attack wave. The sea remained unnervingly calm. Crewmen on Roma's decks looked upward, shielding their eyes, trying to locate the falling shapes against the afternoon sun. The ship altered course again, but heavy battleships turned slowly. The bombers maintained their altitude, gliding forward with measured precision. At 15:42, the second Fritz X attack wave began. Italian anti-aircraft guns opened fire, filling the sky with black puffs, but the bombers were far beyond effective range. In the minutes that followed, 2 bombs would strike Roma with devastating accuracy, one of them in a location no battleship designer could have anticipated. That strike would trigger a chain of explosions so violent, so sudden, that the battleship would appear to simply vanish. No survivors from the central compartments could later describe what happened inside those steel corridors. Only fragments of the ship's final moments were reconstructed from the sailors who escaped the sinking, and from the silent evidence the sea reluctantly revealed. To understand how such destruction could occur, how a seemingly invulnerable battleship could disappear so completely, we must examine the many angles of this event. Human angle. For the men aboard Roma, the morning of 9 September 1943 began like any other at sea. Routine inspections, drills, and the quiet hum of engines. But beneath the steel decks, tension simmered. Officers had received vague intelligence about possible German retaliation, yet the exact nature of the threat remained uncertain. Sailors spoke in whispers about reports of air attacks on Italia and Vittorio Veneto, but few could imagine the precision of the weapon they would soon face. Life aboard a battleship demanded discipline. Every man had a post, a responsibility, a ritual that offered a measure of control amid the chaos of war. Yet as the first bombs fell, human routines collided with an unprecedented reality. Crewmen attempted to man their stations, follow orders, and respond to alarms, but the destruction came faster than anyone could act. In the aftermath, survivors recounted the surreal sensations: decks cracking beneath feet, the metallic scent of smoke and fuel, and the deafening roar of explosions that seemed to originate from the very heart of the ship. Fear was immediate, visceral, and inescapable. The human cost of technological warfare was laid bare in minutes, underscoring the vulnerability of even the most disciplined crews when confronted with a weapon no training had prepared them for. Tactical angle. Tactically, Roma's disappearance illustrates the perils of maneuvering large naval units under air threat. Battleships, by their very design, are slow to turn and limited in speed. In open water, this made them ideal for surface engagements, but extremely vulnerable to precision aerial bombardment. The fleet's attempt to alter course and maintain formation highlights the challenges faced by commanders under duress. A balance between maintaining cohesion, preserving communication, and attempting evasive maneuvers in response to a new, unknown threat. Destroyers attempted to lay smoke screens, a traditional defensive measure, but against high-altitude guided bombs, these efforts were largely symbolic. The Germans exploited altitude, speed, and precision, targeting command vessels first to sow chaos in the fleet's chain of command. The rapid succession of attacks left little room for tactical adaptation. Decisions made on the bridge could be rendered moot in seconds, proving that even the most experienced naval strategists were suddenly at the mercy of an entirely new form of warfare. Technological angle. Perhaps the most decisive factor in the disappearance of Roma was technology itself. The Fritz X glide bomb represented a paradigm shift. Unlike conventional bombs, it could be guided via radio signals after release, allowing bomber crews to adjust its trajectory mid-flight. Weighing nearly 1,400 kilograms with a 320-kilogram armor-piercing warhead, it could penetrate reinforced battleship decks and detonate internally. Italian naval architects had designed Roma's armor to resist traditional bombs and artillery shells, but the Fritz X exploited vulnerabilities that had never been anticipated. High-altitude launch reduced exposure to anti-aircraft fire, while the bomb's controlled descent maximized its kinetic energy, allowing it to pierce heavy armor. In essence, a battleship that could shrug off torpedoes, shellfire, and near misses from conventional ordnance suddenly found itself defenseless against a weapon designed to think faster, fall farther, and hit harder than any human gunner could counter. The combination of precision engineering, high-altitude release, and radio control transformed what had once been the most secure warship afloat into a floating target with little recourse. The very technology that symbolized innovation also became the instrument of near-total annihilation. Leadership/command angle. Admiral Carlo Bergamini, commander of the Italian battle fleet, faced an unprecedented challenge. Charged with getting the fleet safely to Allied-controlled ports while maintaining order amid political upheaval. He bore responsibility for hundreds of sailors and the fate of some of Italy's most formidable warships. His decisions that morning were tactical and deeply moral. He had to weigh the risk of remaining near Sardinia, where German forces were active, against the uncertainty of navigating open waters under enemy air superiority. Orders to avoid engagement with former allies were clear, yet Bergamini had to maintain fleet cohesion under duress. Communication with other vessels was intermittent, delayed by radio traffic and the chaos of a sudden shift from ally to adversary. The pressure of command, compounded by the political betrayal of the armistice, created a tense environment in which every choice could have fatal consequences. Bergamini's final actions aboard Roma, attempting evasive maneuvers and directing damage control protocols, reflect a leadership style that combined calm authority with a grim awareness of the fleet's vulnerability. Even as destruction approached, his priority was the survival of his crew and the preservation of Italy's naval honor. Yet no amount of tactical foresight could anticipate the speed and precision of the attack that would soon unfold. Enemy perspective angle. From the German viewpoint, the operation against the Italian fleet was both strategic and symbolic. The Luftwaffe sought to neutralize Italian naval power quickly, ensuring that Italy's shift in allegiance did not translate into operational advantage for the Allies. Bomber crews of Kampfgeschwader 100 were meticulously trained in the use of the Fritz X, understanding its potential to penetrate battleship armor from high altitude. German intelligence had closely monitored the fleet's movements and knew that the command ship, Roma, would be a priority target. Their objective was twofold: destroy the flagship to disrupt Italian command and demonstrate the effectiveness of guided munitions. Contemporary German reports describe the attack as a calculated operation executed with precision, emphasizing the revolutionary potential of radio-guided weapons. From their perspective, the vanishing of Roma was not a mystery. It was the expected outcome of planning, technology, and opportunity converging at the right moment. Moral/legal angle. The suddenness and severity of the attack raised questions about the morality and legality of the engagement. Italian sailors were technically former allies. They were now ordered not to resist their erstwhile partners. The deployment of a new, experimental weapon that struck with almost surgical precision blurred the lines between traditional combat and technological assassination. Post-war inquiries debated whether the use of guided bombs against capital ships constituted a breach of conduct or simply an evolution of warfare. Unlike torpedoes or conventional bombs, the Fritz X could bypass traditional defenses, leaving little chance for crew survival. Historians note that the attack illustrates the shifting ethical landscape of modern war. Precision could amplify lethality, but human judgment lagged behind technological capability. The vanishing of Roma became a case study in the consequences of innovation divorced from established naval protocols, highlighting both the efficiency and the moral ambiguity inherent in modern combat. The intersection of human experience, tactical limitation, technological innovation, command responsibility, enemy strategy, and moral ambiguity sets the stage for the decisive moments that would follow. It was the afternoon of 9 September 1943, and the Italian fleet sailed south from La Maddalena. The sun hung low over the horizon, glinting off the water's surface, casting the battleships in long, golden silhouettes. On Roma, Admiral Bergamini moved between the bridge and observation posts, overseeing course adjustments as destroyers tried to maintain protective formations around the capital ships. The mood was tense but measured. Officers and sailors accustomed to danger remained alert, yet there was no hint of the extraordinary devastation that was about to unfold. At precisely 15:42 hours, the first Fritz X glide bomb struck. Dropped from high altitude by a Do-217 bomber of Kampfgeschwader 100, it descended silently, guided by radio signals, unerringly toward its target. The crew of Roma spotted it as a glinting object above the deck, but its speed and trajectory made interception nearly impossible. Anti-aircraft guns fired in a desperate attempt to deter the bomb, but their shells could not reach the altitude or adjust to the glide path of the weapon. The bomb struck near Roma's midsection. An enormous explosion shook the hull, sending steel decks twisting and bending. Fires erupted instantly, consuming nearby compartments and igniting fuel lines. Crewmen scrambled to man damage control stations, but chaos and smoke limited visibility. Survivors later described the feeling as if the ship had been torn from the water itself, the force of the blast lifting entire sections before they collapsed. Within minutes, a second Fritz X found its mark, this time hitting closer to the bow, near one of the main gun turrets. The resulting detonation ruptured magazines, sending a shockwave throughout the vessel. The battleship, which had once epitomized stability and dominance, now shuddered violently, listing to port. Steel plating buckled, hatches blew open, and sailors were thrown from deck to deck. From the perspective of the destroyers and escorting cruisers, the sight was surreal. Roma seemed to vanish behind a haze of smoke, fire, and towering splashes from the bomb's impact. Survivors on nearby vessels watched helplessly as the flagship, the heart of the Italian fleet, succumbed to a combination of explosive force and structural vulnerability. Amid the explosions, Admiral Bergamini issued orders as best he could, directing fire control and evacuation procedures. His voice, calm yet resolute, attempted to impose order on an uncontrollable scene. Witnesses later recalled seeing the admiral near the bridge, issuing instructions until the ship's list became too severe and communication lines were destroyed. The human and mechanical elements of command were overwhelmed in moments, underscoring the lethal effectiveness of the new weapon. As Roma continued to sustain damage, compartments flooded rapidly. The list increased, throwing heavy artillery and machinery into chaos. Smoke and fire coalesced into an almost opaque cloud that obscured the battleship from the view of any distant observer. Within 30 minutes, the once mighty vessel was almost entirely submerged amid debris, fire, and plumes of oil on the water's surface. This sequence of events was recorded through survivor accounts and post-war investigations, but the immediacy of the destruction made precise timing difficult. The ship that had been the flagship of the Italian fleet, a symbol of naval engineering and national pride, was gone. Only fragments, life rafts, personal belongings, and small wreckage were later recovered, floating in the calm Mediterranean waters. The suddenness and completeness of Roma's destruction shocked the Italian Navy and the world. There was no conventional sinking. There was no time for effective countermeasures. A combination of high-altitude bombing, guided precision, and vulnerabilities in ship design turned an entire battleship into an instantaneous casualty. This first wave of the climax demonstrates the horrifying power of technological innovation in modern warfare. Yet the full implications, survivor accounts, detailed bomb trajectories, and post-sinking naval operations unfold in the subsequent hours, providing the complete picture of one of WWII's most extraordinary naval disappearances. In the minutes following the second strike, the full magnitude of the attack became apparent. Roma's hull, compromised by multiple Fritz X hits, began to buckle under the combined stresses of explosions, flooding, and fire. The list increased rapidly. The superstructure groaned as steel twisted, sending the ship's massive guns swinging unpredictably. Officers attempted to maintain order, directing crew to evacuation points and damage control teams, but corridors and stairwells filled with smoke, debris, and seawater. Communication lines failed under the shock of repeated detonations, leaving many sections of the ship isolated and crew members stranded below decks. From the perspective of the surrounding fleet, the sight was nightmarish. Destroyers and cruisers attempted to approach for rescue, maneuvering carefully through floating debris, plumes of oil, and intermittent fires. Some sailors dove into the water to reach survivors, while others launched lifeboats under the ever-present threat of additional strikes. Even as the German bombers completed their run and withdrew, the damage had already sealed the battleship's fate. Eyewitness accounts describe the scene with chilling clarity: men clinging to life rafts, bodies floating amid wreckage, fires spreading across debris fields, and the eerie silence that followed the initial chaos. Of Roma's crew, only a fraction survived. Estimates suggest that more than 1,300 sailors and officers perished in the attack, including Admiral Bergamini himself. His body, along with many others, was never recovered. Search and rescue operations commenced immediately, with surviving vessels accounting for as many survivors as possible. Ships scoured the area for hours, picking up men from the water and attempting to extinguish small fires on floating debris. Aircraft patrolled the seas, scanning the sea for evidence of wreckage, yet the sheer volume of destruction made it nearly impossible to reconstruct the sequence of events in real time. Forensic analysis conducted after the war, once wreckage was located decades later, confirmed the sequence. 2 Fritz X bombs penetrated the armored decks, detonating within critical internal compartments, including the forward magazines. The resulting secondary explosions and structural collapses ensured that Roma sank rapidly. The precision of the attacks demonstrated not just the destructive capability of guided munitions, but also the vulnerability of even the most modern battleship design when confronted with unforeseen technological advancement. The sinking of Roma sent shockwaves through the Italian Navy and the broader Allied command. It marked one of the first instances in naval history where a battleship was effectively destroyed by a remote-guided weapon while at sea, highlighting the obsolescence of traditional naval defenses against emerging technologies. Contemporary reports and intercepted German communications emphasized the satisfaction of Luftwaffe planners, who described the operation as both tactically and psychologically devastating. The sudden disappearance of Roma also exposed the human toll of high-tech warfare. Survivors spoke of the chaos, the fear, and the near impossibility of escaping the confined compartments of the ship as fire and flooding spread. The attack was over in under an hour, yet its impact would resonate for years, shaping naval tactics, fleet planning, and the design of future warships. As the sun set over the Mediterranean that day, the waters that had carried a proud battleship now held only fragments and memories. The flagship, which had symbolized Italian naval power, had vanished completely, its loss a combination of human courage, technological innovation, and the unforgiving calculus of modern warfare. The destruction of Roma marked not just the end of a ship, but the culmination of political betrayal, tactical miscalculation, and the lethal power of precision-guided munitions, a moment that demanded reflection on the consequences of war and the evolution of naval combat. The waters off the Gulf of Sardinia carried the silent testimony of disaster. By nightfall on 9 September 1943, the Italian fleet had regrouped as best it could, but the absence of Roma was a stark, undeniable reality. Over 1,300 men were lost, including Admiral Carlo Bergamini, the commanding officer who had guided the fleet with steadfast discipline until the final moments. Survivors were few, scattered across lifeboats and floating debris, physically and emotionally shattered. Their accounts would later form the cornerstone of historical reconstructions of the sinking. Rescue operations were immediate, but limited by both environmental and operational constraints. Destroyers, the fleet's fastest and most maneuverable ships, conducted rapid sweeps, retrieving sailors from the cold waters while avoiding floating wreckage and small fires on the surface. Aircraft from nearby Italian and Allied-controlled ports assisted in locating survivors, dropping life rafts and supplies, but the sheer scale of destruction meant that many remained unaccounted for. The fleet's morale suffered severely. Sailors who had once felt pride in serving aboard a modern battleship now faced the harrowing reality that technological innovation had rendered even the most powerful warships vulnerable. Strategically, the sinking of Roma sent ripples through the Mediterranean theater. German forces had achieved a tactical and psychological victory, demonstrating the lethal potential of precision-guided munitions. Italian naval planners were forced to reconsider fleet movements, evacuation protocols, and escort strategies in a theater dominated increasingly by air power. Allied commanders, while nominally pleased at the weakening of Axis naval capabilities, also recognized the implications. Naval engagements were entering a new era where high-altitude guided weapons could neutralize capital ships, with unprecedented efficiency. Within hours of the attack, Italian High Command issued reports acknowledging the fleet's losses and instructing remaining vessels to proceed with caution. These communications reflected both shock and the logistical imperative to preserve surviving ships. Orders emphasized avoiding direct confrontation with German aircraft while maintaining momentum toward Allied-controlled ports. The immediate operational consequences were clear. The Italian fleet was weakened, leadership morale was shaken, and the Mediterranean had become an even more dangerous environment for large naval formations. On the German side, reports were precise and meticulous. Luftwaffe commanders documented the engagement, noting the accuracy of the strikes, the rapid sinking of Roma, and the minimal losses incurred by their own forces. Intercepted communications and post-war declassified records reveal a mixture of pride and tactical analysis. The attack confirmed the effectiveness of guided munitions, reshaped bomber training programs, and established a precedent for future operations against heavily armored vessels. The human aftermath, however, remained grim. Survivors recounted hours spent in frigid waters, clinging to debris while watching companions disappear beneath the waves. Psychological trauma accompanied physical injury, leaving scars that would endure long after the Mediterranean swallowed the wreckage. Reports compiled in the weeks following the sinking catalogued these experiences, capturing both the heroism and vulnerability of the sailors, as well as the ineffable sense of loss that accompanies the vanishing of a ship and its crew in an instant. In the months and years following the sinking of Roma, the Italian Navy faced both operational and institutional reckoning. The immediate loss of a flagship and the deaths of more than 1,000 sailors forced a reassessment of naval doctrine. Ship designs, previously focused on heavy armor and artillery power, were scrutinized in light of the vulnerability revealed by guided bombs. Lessons drawn from Roma's destruction influenced not only Italian shipbuilding, but also Allied naval strategies, emphasizing air superiority, anti-aircraft defenses, and the growing significance of technology in determining naval outcomes. Post-war investigations provided additional clarity. Allied and Italian naval historians pieced together survivor testimonies, German operational reports, and intelligence intercepts to reconstruct the event. The findings confirmed the precision of the Fritz X guided bomb and highlighted the unique circumstances that allowed Roma's rapid sinking. Declassified German documents emphasized tactical planning, while Italian analyses focused on vulnerabilities in communication, fleet formation, and damage control protocols. These investigations underscored a pivotal realization. Traditional battleship dominance could no longer guarantee security against the evolving face of aerial warfare. The broader historical impact was profound. Roma's disappearance became emblematic of the transition from conventional surface warfare to a theater increasingly defined by technology, innovation, and asymmetry. Naval commanders worldwide recognized that capital ships, once symbols of national pride and strategic strength, were now susceptible to weapons that rendered armor and firepower insufficient. The sinking also reinforced the importance of rapid intelligence, reconnaissance, and adaptability in fleet operations, a lesson not lost on both Axis and Allied powers. On a human level, the tragedy prompted memorialization and reflection. Monuments to the lost crew were established in Italy, and survivor accounts were preserved in naval archives, ensuring that the story of Roma remained part of collective memory. Families of the deceased received official recognition, though the delayed recovery of wreckage, found decades later, meant that closure arrived slowly for many. Historians have noted that the sinking exemplifies the convergence of technological innovation and human vulnerability, offering enduring lessons about the human cost of warfare. Politically, the event also reinforced the complexities of alliance and betrayal. Italy's armistice with the Allies, combined with German retaliation, illustrated the high stakes of strategic decisions made under duress. The fleet's attempted transfer to Allied-controlled ports was not merely a tactical maneuver, but a fraught exercise in trust, command, and survival. The disappearance of Roma thus became a microcosm of broader wartime dynamics, rapid shifts in allegiance, the lethal potential of emergent technologies, and the ethical dilemmas faced by combatants caught between duty and circumstance. Ultimately, the sinking of Roma reshaped naval thinking for decades to come. Lessons learned influenced ship design, fleet deployment, and air defense doctrine throughout the remainder of the war and into the Cold War era. The battle between human decision-making, mechanical resilience, and technological innovation, embodied in the tragic final hours of Roma, remains a benchmark for understanding the interplay of these forces in modern naval history. The Mediterranean that afternoon bore witness to more than the sinking of a battleship. It witnessed the convergence of human courage, technological innovation, and the unforgiving calculus of war. Roma's disappearance was not merely the loss of steel and artillery, it was a profound demonstration of how rapidly the nature of naval combat had changed. A vessel once considered nearly invincible, and the sailors who relied upon her strength were rendered vulnerable in moments by precision, speed, and innovation. The story of Roma reflects the duality of human endeavor in war. Sailors carried out their duties with discipline and bravery. Officers made rapid, impossible decisions, and yet even the most resolute human effort could not overcome the transformative power of technology. The Fritz X bombs, guided with unprecedented precision, symbolized a new era in which the edge of human control could be outpaced by machines, where the balance of life and death could hinge on calculations made hundreds of meters above the waves. Yet amid the tragedy, there is also a testament to memory, resilience, and reflection. The survivors' accounts, painstakingly recorded, allow history to preserve the human dimension of the catastrophe. Memorials honor the lost, archives retain their stories, and scholars study the events to understand the intersection of strategy, leadership, and innovation. Roma's fate serves as a reminder that technological advances, no matter how impressive, are inseparable from the human lives they affect. In the end, the vanishing of Roma is more than a naval disaster. It is a lens through which we can examine the evolution of warfare and the enduring fragility of even the most formidable creations. It challenges us to consider the responsibilities that accompany innovation and the consequences of strategic decisions under pressure. The Mediterranean waters, once the stage for Roma's final moments, remain silent now, but the lessons of that day continue to resonate, a solemn echo of courage, loss, and the inexorable march of history.